On New Year's Day of AD 193, Rome woke up to the news that their emperor, Commodus, the son of Marcus Aurelius, was dead. As we talked about on the last episode, the senators rejoiced at this news, and they affixed to Commodus all of the terrors and horrors and tumult and catastrophes of their generation, and looked anew towards a man who they thought would restore discipline and order and conservative values. But what members of the Senate did not realize was that the Pax Romana was dead and gone. A new kind of emperor would soon rise up. But that didn't stop members of the Roman Senate from trying to reassert power. It did not go well. We'll talk about what happened on this episode of the Pax Romana podcast. Episode 58, Empire for Sale. Several episodes back, I quoted from the Roman historian Cassius Dio, a senator who lived through the age of Commodus and the tumultuous decades which followed. Cassius Dio said that when Marcus Aurelius died, the history of Rome descended from, quote, a kingdom of gold to one of iron and rust. Cassius Dio wrote those words late in his life, probably in the 220s or 230s AD. In other words, about 40 years or so after the events they describe. Cassius Dio had some perspective. He realized that the Roman Empire that he had known, the Pax Romana, was gone. But if you had talked to Cassius Dio the morning of January 1st, 193 AD, he probably would have been optimistic for the future of the Roman Empire. Not only was Commodus dead, but there was a man ready to take power who the Senate had full confidence in. This was a man named Pertinax. Pertinax had been Commodus's consular colleague at the start of the previous year, 192, and he was currently the new urban prefect. And funnily enough, on the day that everyone found out that Commodus was dead, Pertinax was already in the camp of the Praetorian Guard. Now that is strange. The conspiracy to assassinate Commodus, by nature of being a conspiracy, is still a bit mysterious to us. We know that his mistress Marcia was involved, and one of his trainers, Narcissus. Historians have suspected that there was a much wider group of conspirators, but it's hard to know who was involved and who wasn't. The fact that Pertinax was already at the camp of the Praetorian Guard suggests that either he was involved or somebody he knew was involved and got word to him about what was going to happen or what had happened, and that he needed to be prepared to take power. Pertinax was an older man, already in his mid-60s, and some sources even claim that he was not noble by birth, that his father had been a slave and was given his freedom. Honestly, I doubt that that is the case. I think that's a later invention. But what might be true was that Pertinax did have to rise through the ranks. It seems that Pertinax's father was a soldier, maybe even an officer, and he used his position in the Roman military to secure his son Pertinax an officer position during the Parthian War that Lucius Verus fought in the 160s. And we talk about that war a little bit in episode 48, but especially in episode 49. So you can go back and listen if you need a refresher on the Parthian War. Pertinax may have been just a lowly centurion in that war. He may have also been a primus pilus, which is a more senior position in the army, a kind of centurion over centurions. At some point, he won the attention of Marcus Aurelius, and the emperor sent Pertinax to Britain to serve as a military tribune. This is a kind of officer position, an advisory position that reports directly to a general or a governor. And then shortly after that, when the Marcomannic Wars broke out, Marcus needed dedicated men, and Marcus tended to appoint men based on merit. And so he called on Pertinax to be a military governor, that's a procurator, in the Roman province of Dacia during the Marcomannic Wars. Again, it seems that Pertinax had excelled in this position, and so by the mid-170s, Marcus appointed him as a consul. From what we can tell, this is the first time we see Pertinax in a role that was reserved only for senators, and it's probably at this time that Marcus simply appointed Pertinax into the Senate. From there on, he holds a string of governorships in imperial provinces, gains a reputation as a disciplinarian. So while the stories about Pertinax being the son of a freedman are probably not true, the point still stands that this is a man who was not noble by birth and who earned his place by merit largely under the reign of Marcus Aurelius. Pertinax was a loyal governor to Commodus, and he was brought into the city of Rome in 192 to serve his second consulship with Commodus as his colleague. And then, as I said earlier, he finds himself in the camp of the Praetorian Guard on New Year's Day of 193, preparing to be appointed emperor. What an incredible career trajectory. There had been nothing like this ever before. A man rising from a junior officer in the military all the way to the top of the empire. Now, the Praetorian Guard, as we have seen, are the ones that really appoint emperors at this time, and Pertinax had the support of the Praetorian prefect, a man named Letus, and then the Senate followed the Praetorians by conferring the empire onto Pertinax. And the empire needed a man of merit to resolve all of the problems that had piled up under the reign of Commodus. It wasn't just the case that Commodus was a megalomaniac. He also spent money wildly. This is what Cassius Dio says about the state of finances when Pertinax took office. Quote, "There was such a dearth of funds in the imperial treasury that only 1,000,000 sesterces could be found. Pertinax therefore raised money as best he could from the statues, the arms, the horses, the furniture, and the favorites of Commodus, and gave the praetorians all that he had promised, and to the populace 100 denarii per man. Indeed, all the articles that Commodus had collected, whether as luxuries or for gladiatorial combats or for chariot driving, were exposed in the auction room, primarily, of course, to be sold, yet with the further purpose of showing up the late emperor's deeds and practices, and also of finding out who their purchasers would be." That's Cassius Dio's Roman History, Book 74. Pertinax knew that the Praetorian soldiers that had made him emperor needed to be paid. Cassius Dio, however, says that all the money that was owed to them was given. This does not seem to be fully true. From other sources, we have the impression that Pertinax did not give them the entire bonus, that he did not have enough money to do so, at least not at the very beginning. So he was only able to give them half the promised bonus. In the meantime, Pertinax sought to restore the purity of the Roman silver coinage, which had been debased a little bit under Marcus, but especially under Commodus, and he restored an 80% silver standard. That also must have cost him some money which he did not have, but Pertinax wanted, apparently, to do things the right way. He wanted to restore integrity to the empire, and that meant restoring integrity to the coinage. Another way that Pertinax tried to raise money was by recalling the bribes that Commodus had paid out to the Germanic tribes who had previously been attacking Rome. We don't know much else about Pertinax because his reign was so short. Cassius Dio was a friend and called him a reformer, a public-spirited man, a man of great personal integrity, but he was, alas, a short-lived emperor, reigning a mere 87 days. Cassius Dio tells us that Pertinax also expected strict military discipline, and this also caused some grumbling among Rome's soldiers, who had enjoyed a fairly relaxed lifestyle under Commodus. Early in the month of March, just over 2 months into his reign, an attempt was made on Pertinax's life, which was unsuccessful. At the end of the month, another attempt was made, this one far more concentrated. 200 Praetorian guardsmen rushed the palace on March 28th, AD 193. Their captain, Letus, who initially had supported Pertinax as emperor, not only seems to have just allowed this to happen, but may have even encouraged it. The praetorians wanted more money, and Pertinax had nothing to give them. He tried to tell them this, we're told. He reasoned with the Praetorian Guard, men who had come to take his life. His words, however, were just that, and without extra money to back them up, the Praetorians seized the emperor and murdered him in cold blood. In the aftermath of Pertinax's death, one of the most surprising and maybe shameful things thus far in Roman imperial history occurred, and that was two men effectively vying for control of the empire by means of what appeared to be a kind of auction. It was not a literal auction, but that is a pretty good analogy. As we have seen with many emperors, the Praetorian Guard had become the main power broker, and the way to secure the fidelity of the Praetorian Guard was to pay them. So it's not surprising that two men simply decided to openly offer the Praetorian bonuses in exchange for being made emperor. One of these men was Sulpicianus. He was the current urban prefect appointed there after Pertinax left the post, and he was the father-in-law of Pertinax. Now, wouldn't that make him super old? Well, no, he was actually about 10 years younger than Pertinax. And he had the fortune of being in the Praetorian camp around the time that Pertinax was assassinated. His main competitor was a well-pedigreed elite, a man who had had former consuls and senators in his family line. His name was Didius Julianus, and he had taken over the governorship of North Africa, or what the Romans just called Africa, after Pertinax left the post to become consul and then eventually to become emperor. So Sulpicianus offered the Praetorians a bonus of 20,000 sesterces. This would be something like 8 years' salary. Didius Julianus, who couldn't get into the camp because Sulpicianus was already there, had to shout from the walls, and he offered 25,000 sesterces per man. He also spread some rumors telling the Praetorians that if the other guy won, Sulpicianus, that he would probably execute any of the men that killed Pertinax. That was the deciding factor in the end. The Praetorians took the money. Didius Julianus was proclaimed emperor. Sulpicianus, however, was mercifully allowed to live. But Didius Julianus did not have the consent of everybody else in Rome. He was perceived by the population to have plotted to kill Pertinax. This almost certainly wasn't true, but it didn't really matter. Rumors were already running wild, and it was impossible to stop them. It was, of course, also well known that he openly bought the empire, and he did not earn his position by merit. Now, in one sense, this is nothing new. Several emperors that we have seen had done this exact thing, but they had some kind of family connection to the previous emperor, or they had some other kind of rationale that allowed people to dismiss their own cognitive dissonance. Didius Julianus, however, had shouted his bids from the walls. There was really no ignoring what he did. He also immediately and suddenly debased the currency, reversing the improvements that Pertinax had made. And I don't know if people realized it, but by doing so, he was immediately undercutting the value of the bonuses and salaries that the empire would be paying out. And he allowed Pertinax's murderers to live, just as he promised. Fine for them, but an emperor had been killed in cold blood. There were plenty of powerful people that thought that totally unacceptable, and so they riled up groups of citizens who threw stones at Didius Julianus when he would show up in public. And if they weren't accosting him with stones, they chanted and made up songs against him. So it very much appears that the man in charge does not have a mandate to rule. Others in the Roman Empire realized this, and as we'll see in the next episode, suddenly several more men declare themselves to be emperor and begin making beelines for Rome to take it over. This would spawn a tumultuous period of civil war, and a year that would forever be known as the Year of the Five Emperors. We'll talk about this civil war and the man who won it on the next episode of the Pax Romana podcast.
Thanks for listening to the Pax Romana podcast. For more information, including a list of primary sources and further reading, check the show notes. Music by Red Productions and Exocor. Follow Professor Colin Elliott on X at ProfCPE or email colin@paxromanapodcast.com. Listen to more episodes on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or just about anywhere podcasts are available. Stay tuned for the next episode of the Pax Romana podcast.